Okay, I think we can start now. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Professor Nguyen from University of Michigan. I have a couple of things to say about Lam. I believe that he's done his master thesis in AI planning, so this is like going back to maybe the year 2000. Perhaps he was trying to, do some soul searching about what AI is, and then he went on and did his master degree with Rao Subramati, who was also quite a really famous guy in AI planning. This is back in Arizona State University. And perhaps he's not happy with what he found. He went on and did his PhD in machine learning under the supervision of Mike Jordan and Martin Wainwright. This is at Berkeley. And then perhaps he's not happy with what he's found. He then went on and became a faculty at the Department of Statistics in University of Michigan. And so today he's going to tell us about parameter estimation and interpretability in Bayesian mixture models. So please join me in welcoming Lam.
What should I say? I can move anywhere.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank Nguyen for the invitation and opportunity to come to visit this group. Heard a lot about it, and I'm going to talk about this talk, parameter estimation and interpretability in Bayesian mixture modeling. So I have been coming back to Vietnam and attending conference, running summer school, trying to do about, and so I kind of know what to talk about after years. I'm not sure what sort of topic that I should be addressing here, and I didn't want to think too much about it, and so I just here I come.
Decide why you want to stay because I moved from there to here.
Okay. So this is a talk that actually I gave just 2 months ago at Oxford. Is a keynote talk at Bayesian and Parametric Conference, which is the field that I'm working on. So I'm just excited to talk about the topic at the moment. And this work is joined with my PhD student, Xuan, Michigan, and a former PhD student that now is doing a postdoc at Berkeley. Supposed to see some overview of the outlines, but basically it's the same topic. There are 3 parts to the talk, and they progress in the sequence. But anyway, I think one is about. Okay, so I don't quite remember what it is. The topic is about mixture models. Mixture models is I'm sure that everybody here knows that it is the simplest class of model with latent variables, right? Or the simplest class of model with a sort of hierarchical, but at the same time, perhaps it is one of the most powerful class of models in all of statistics, data science, machine learning, so that is sort of the starting point for many of the things that I like to do. So what are mixture models good for? Well, they're good for learning about complex data, about learning about modeling and learning about heterogeneity, like diversity in data. That's what it's good for. You're sort of mixing up collections of basic building blocks for building more and more complex models. So, of course, at a technical level, there are several uses. One is you use something like a mixture model, mixture density, things like mixture Gaussian density, things like that. And that could be thought of as a black box modeling device for density estimation. Okay? So you use this mixture density as a way to approximate rather complex forms of density functions. You don't. So you know, once you can estimate the density, then you can do a lot of good things about it. You can do prediction. You can, and most importantly, perhaps you can use these mixture densities, these mixture models to solve problems like clustering. You have a bunch of data points you want to learn about. You're sort of assuming that the data are clustering into clusters. You want to learn about them using mixture models to do that. So that's a clustering problem. And you want to go a bit further. You don't just care about clustering, but you want to learn about the nature of each of these individual clusters, because each cluster captures something representative about the underlying subpopulations. You cannot use a single cluster to represent all the data, because data are heterogeneous, interesting, and so we want to learn about this heterogeneity. We want to estimate the parameters, because the parameters here are going to be used to represent different aspects about the population. And mixture models, of course, because I'm talking in this conference based on our parametric, where we don't just talk about finite mixture. There's a question about how many mixture components, how many clusters, how many groups, right? That's always the kind of questions that people are interested in. And it's sort of model selection problem. We'll think about, in particular, I will talk about finite mixtures. I also want to talk about infinite mixtures, but we'll think about infinite mixture models when we talk about them, is that it allows you a way to sort of learn about this number of clusters almost automatically. Almost automatically. There's a very principal way that you can sort of learn the number of clusters from data. Okay. So a lot of good things about this class models. And even if you go for something more complex, like you create more hierarchies of latent variables, the essence is still a mixture model, just a bit more structure. So you want to understand this class of models, and a lot of people in different fields using this class of model for their work, their applications. And obviously, as you use these models more and more, and you find them to be useful, you want to understand. You get more ambitious. You want to understand about the quality of your method, right? You want to understand about the quality of the parameter estimates. You want to be able to interpret, right? Because you want to be able to say that, okay, data is so diverse, there has to be like 3 different clusters representing 2 different subgroups. And then you have different parameters that represent each of the groups. You want to see how these groups are different through these parameters that we estimate. That is, you want to attach a meaning to the parameters that you use, right, to represent the model. So, you want to interpret, and if you want to interpret, you have to know how well you can estimate the parameters to begin with. So I'm very much interested in parameter estimation here. Okay, so the 3 parts of the talks that address slightly different technical aspects. One is the situations when you don't know how many mixture components, when you don't know how many groups, how do you deal with them? And the second part of the talk will talk about what is the quality of what's conversion rate of these parameters. We'll stay on projection rates because I talk about the Bayesian methodology, but whatever I talk about holds for both phase and frequencies. And then finally, and this is sort of interesting, is the impact of the model on misspecification. So all models are wrong. We know that, and it just captures some of our assumption about the data. And so suppose that our model is actually wrong. What does it going to affect the things that we estimate? What does it mean when the models are wrong? You want to attach meaning to the parameters to the models. What does it mean what we estimate? Okay. Right. So a little bit more about the last part as a teaser. There's a famous saying by George Fox, right? All models are wrong, but some are useful. But I just want to sort of slightly twist the sentence a bit in our context. That is, all mixture models are misspecified, but perhaps some are more interpretable than others. Because at least one of the use of mixture models is you want to use it to interpret, right, different subpopulations. You don't just want to estimate the density and it's a black box device. You want to interpret. And I try to argue that based on some of the results that we have obtained, that maybe some are more interpretable than others. In particular, here's a kind of result that I will tell you. When you talk about mixture models, I give you the definition. There's several ways you can misspecify. You can misspecify the kernel density or the mixing measure. So that are two part of the model. I define them later. And so the question then is, if one of the two are wrong, or maybe both are not quite correctly specified, how fast does the posterior distribution on the parameter contract? And what does it contract to? Okay. Now, of course, I think this group is a VinAI, right? So there's something to do with certain industry applications, and of course, especially for people who are working on applications, sometimes you ask, why do we care about theory, right? So this all, by the way, should just be theoretical. And why would I care about asymptotic behavior? Or why would I care about the conversion rate of a procedure? It might, because all this theory assume that the amount of data sort of increases towards infinity, right? And of course, you don't have infinite data, despite the fact that we're living in the big data era. We always have a very bounded amount of data for the problems that we care about. But I think the question that we raise, the kind of theory that we address, does carry some relevant implications. In particular, if I can prove something, it can prove something that converges at a very slow rate, right, towards the truth, assuming that there's such a true parameters. Perhaps at least, even though I don't have infinite amount of data, this kind of conversion behavior does tell me something about the effect of data on the movement of mass from the prior distribution to the posterior distribution. Okay, so if you do Bayesian inference, right, essentially what you do is that you can try to compute the conditional probability, right, of the parameter you care about, condition on the data that you have. So that's Bayes, right? So there's a movement, because in order to compute conditional probability, you need a prior distribution. Prior probability applies Bayes rule to get the posterior, and of course the reason that you can go from prior to posterior is because you have data. You condition on data, right? So all we ask is, if you increase more data, how does it going to affect the movement of the prior to the posterior? How does data affect your understanding about the parameters you care about? So even though the theory is asymptotic, the kind of race we get would say something about the effect of data on learning, on inference, right? And of course, all models are wrong, all models are misspecified, and if you can say something about certain choice of models give you better rate, then perhaps it is something that we should be interested in. Okay, so this is a set of mixture models. Very simple in terms of notation at this point. The BN here is because it's a Bayesian non-parametric way, but again, this talk is not really limited to Bayesian or non-parametrics at this point. Here's a form of mixture model. You have this mixture density, right? So on the left-hand side, you see here that you have a collection of data points, and there seems to be some heterogeneous pattern that you want to learn about, and naturally you would use something as a mixture. So for instance, you have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sort of clouds visually, right? Points, and you want to use something like 5 different forms of distribution, something like Gaussian. That's a simple example. So you want to learn about these 5 different Gaussian here. And the Gaussian distribution might be represented in terms of the mean and the variance for each of the components. So different components have different means, different location, different spread. So you say something about the means and the variance, say something about the nature, the distinct nature of different subpopulations of the data. And of course, this is unsupervised learning problem, right? You don't have the label, so you don't have the kind of data label that tell you which components you belong to. So that's why you want to use mixture models here. Mixture density, right, has this form. So on the left, the PG of x is mixture density for each x. It takes this form. It's just a convex combination of the mixture components f. So think about f as, say, Gaussian density, right? And theta I as representing, say, the means and or the variance of the I components. Pi is the proportion that you attach to each of the mixture components, right? So that is the familiar form that we all see. Now, this is a very elegant way to capture the parameters of the model. You write out this discrete measure, G, this is a discrete measure that's supported by the atoms theta I. Pi are the corresponding mass. Right? This is a discrete measure. Number of support points of the discrete measure correspond to the number of mutual components, say k. I do allow k the possibility to be infinite. So I talk about both situations. And so, okay, here's the form of the density. You fit it to the data to learn about pi and theta. Now, you can think about all the parameters that's being captured by this discrete measure. This captures everything you want to know about the model. It's a discrete measure. So, now the Bayesian non-parametric way is the following. I want to put a prior description on the things that I don't know about, right? So you can think about it, I put a prior on the pi, I put a prior on the theta. Alternatively, you can think about I'm putting a prior description on the space of discrete measure G, right? Entire space of property measures. So, Bayesian non-parametric feels about to use this kind of prior. So there's something like the Dirichlet process as an example of the kind of prior description on the space of distributions, and that's very powerful. That's pretty useful. And when you put a prior like that on the model, you have a complete model specification, right? And then you assume that given the unknown parameter G, which is a discrete mixing measure G, data are assumed to be IID given that mutual density. Right? So now, what is the Poisson inference problem? You condition on the data, x1 up to xn. You try to compute the Poisson distribution of G given this n data points, right? And that gives you a complete picture about what G is supposed to be. So the kind of theory we can say is that, okay, if n goes to infinity, what does this posterior, what does it contract to? Assuming that there's some true mutual density that you use to generate this data, what we want to be able to say is that as you have more and more data, the posterior distribution on this mixing measure is going to contract with the true mixing measure. That is, you manage to learn the truth if you have more data. And you want to be able to think about how fast this convergence happens, right? How fast it's learning. So two different kind of problems that we were interested in. One is density estimation. That is, I only care about P sub G. I only care about this density function. How fast can I learn this density function? Right? It looks something like this, maybe some kind of nice complex forms. But if you want to be able to interpret your model, you want to be able to interpret what you learn, you want to be able to also say how fast do I estimate the G, right? Not just P sub G. So there's a distinction. So how fast? What happens to this mixing measure G? A posteriori as you have more and more data. So that clear the two different kind of problems. Okay, so this is a very brief state of affair for this kind of DP mixture. This is sort of the background, what have been done and not. So for density estimation, there has been a lot of work in the past, maybe 20 years. A lot of advanced and improved understanding. In particular, this is the kind of result that you can show, that is, the posterior distribution on the mixture density P sub G contracts to the true data density at an optimal rate, where rate here is with respect to the amount of data points. So n goes to infinity, and the sample size, it will contract at a certain rate. That rate can be put to optimal under some mild or some nice smoothing conditions on the nature of the true density. Now for clustering, you need to be a bit more careful. So I think for the last 15 years or so, a lot of people in other fields they like Bayesian non-parametric so much, and they want to adopt something like DP mixture. And one of the reasoning, you read all those papers. One of the sentences you will say in those papers in the introduction is that DP mixtures are good because you don't need to learn the number of clusters. It can learn the number of clusters automatically for you. And in practice, that's what people do. You put something like Dirichlet process prior, you run MCMC, you learn about this posterior distribution on the missing measure, and you will be able to talk about the posterior distribution of this number of mixture components. That sounds good, but it turns out. So there's a nice paper, this one by Miller and Harrison, who show that if you use some non-parametric Bayesian prior like Dirichlet, actually what you get is inconsistent estimate of the true number of parameters. But you always as the number of data points goes to infinity, then actually the number of clusters, according to the Push-layer, tends towards infinity as well. So there's already a positive mass, positive probability that you that the number of clusters under the Push-layer take infinite unbounded value. So that's a bit worrisome.
But if like you have a fixed number of clusters, then you can have a whisper.
If the truth is that you have a fixed number of clusters, let's say 100, and you use something like the usually process prior, and goes to infinity, you never get to 100. No. And the problem is the following. The problem is the following, that so Dirichlet is a non-parametric prior, meaning that it's a prior distribution on the space of distributions. And when you talk about space distribution and prior, you put on that, you have to think about topology. Right? That this is topology of the weak conversions, right? And so the number of support points of a measure is not intrinsic quantity. As far as the number.
Let's say I have a problem. Let's say I have 100 clusters, and if I take enough data, I cannot tell it is 100 clusters or 120.
So for Dirichlet, you cannot tell. But there are other choices that you can tell. So part of this one I'm going to talk about it. If you use something like Dirichlet, there's a way to correct that situation. So yes, you can deal with it. But the reason people don't think about it is that people just say that consistency automatically happens in Bayesian analysis or in most reasonable. But the problem is that when you put a prior on the space that is so big, right? Then actually, if you think about this kind of prior distribution, it places zero probability on the space of measure that has finite number of support points. It puts zero probability. Because that space is actually had measure zero under, it is not very, even though the probability measure, the support of this measure is the entire space of distribution. But the probability that prior placed on the space of a measure with finite number of support points is actually zero, even though the support of the prior, that is, if you take a support, you take a closure of the space, right? It is the entire space of probability measure. And so that is the reason why you have to see consistency. Not that surprising, but yeah. So another way to think about it is the number of discrete number of support points of a measure is not intrinsic quantity for measure as far as the space of measure is concerned. Now, however, if you care about density, no problem, right? That's what we have. If you care clustering, you have to be a bit careful about this situation. Because if you care about clustering, you want to learn the number of clusters as part of the learning. But we will show that there's a way to correct this situation, and there's some prior work that managed to do that. But we show that in some way we can also create a prior. We can create some method that correct this situation for Dirichlet process. So that's actually the first part of the talk. I talk about this very next. The harder question is parameter estimation. Much harder, right? So how fast the Push-layer contract with the true parameters. That's very, very hard. So that will be the second and the third part of the talk. And there's not much result about that. Most of the work is just about density estimation. Okay, so first, in order to talk about Push-layer contraction, in order to talk about conversions of a mixing measure, we need a suitable notion of metric. Because we talk about conversion in the space of probability measure here, and for mixture model, we tend to talk about discrete measure. So it doesn't matter here, but the metric we use is Wasserstein metric, or the kind of metric that arises in the theory of optimal transportation. So I'm going to give you some example, and then I define formally. If you haven't seen it before, it takes a little bit to get your mind wrapped around this definition. But example is very simple. So suppose that I have a discrete measure G there, right? I have K support points, theta 1 up to theta K, the mass of Pi. And let's say G naught is just a Dirac, right? This that have a single support points. It's concentrated at theta naught. And think about the distance between G and G naught. under W1, it is nothing but the weighted sum of the distance from all the theta I coming from G, right, to theta naught. Right? It's natural. If you want to define, that's how you define it. So this is W1. Another example, if I have two discrete measures, G and G prime, they have exactly the case number of support points, theta 1 up to theta k, theta 1 prime up to theta k prime. So the mass is 1 over k. So this is called empirical measure. Now, so the mass is the same, 1 over k. And you want to compare between two measures. What you do? Well, you do sort of minimum matching, right? For each measure, each atom from G, you're trying to find the one that's closest to it. Compute that distance. Do the same thing for every atom, right? And take a sum over those distances, and that define W1 within GG prime, right? So, so you start to see the infimum here is over this set of possible permutation on the index set. So in general, of course, you want to be able to cover this between two measures and probability measures. And what's the sign distance is a particular example of optimal transport distance that. What it does is, as we see in the example, it's sort of trying to quantify the movement of mass from one measure to another. The movement of mass. And you're trying to find the best way to move the mass from one measure to the other one. The optimal way, in some well-defined sense, define the distance between the two measures. And here's the formal definition. WR for any R this one. So let's say you have two probability measures G and G prime on RD. So in order to talk about transportation or movement of mass, you need to formalize this notion, and that is called coupling. Coupling kappa of G and G prime is nothing but a joint distribution which project to the margin of G and G prime. So G and G prime, right, talk about space of all joint distribution that has the same margin as G and G prime. And the cost of moving mass from G and G prime is nothing but the expectation, right, the integral here. And assume that the unit mass, the cost of moving one unit mass from G to G prime is proportional to, let's say, the distance, right, between the 2 points. You can do some power R. And take the expectation over under the coupling, right? Trying to find the best coupling that minimizes, and that's an optimal cost of transportation. Okay? And of course, you have to take 1 over R to make sure that this is a valid metric. Okay, so that's the formal definition, and we saw examples in the previous slide. So it turns out that this notion is incredibly useful for thinking about distance between two discrete measures. It is incredibly useful for thinking about distance between two measures. Incredibly useful for thinking about distance between measures, etc. This is hierarchical models. Hierarchical models is about measure. Every time you add another layer, you add another measure. And this is incredibly natural way to define this notion of distance. And I've been using this for quite some time to analyzing the behavior of hierarchical Bayesian model. I think you can perhaps do something about that with neural networks too. Okay, so going back to the notion of distance between, we're trying to prove something like this, right? Discrete measure G tending toward the discrete measure G naught, right? Under versus time. So for intuition, think about the sequence of Gn, right? That tends towards G naught at certain rate omega n, right? And let's say G naught, the truth has finite number of support points. So what does that mean? Let's say G naught had a finite number of support points, they are the truth, and have a sequence of Gn, right? A discrete measure as well, have a number of support points. What it means is that for every 2 atoms of G naught, right, there'll be a subset of atoms from Gn that tend toward that G naught, that atoms, at the same rate as omega n. That's what it means.
Gn is not supposed to be discrete for Gn.
Well, yeah, it's not obvious, but for Dirichlet, it turns out that the distribution places the property 1 on the space discrete.
we assume everything is discrete?
We don't, as I said, if they are closure of that, it's just entire space of measure. So even if the truth is the density, measure with the density, you see a conversion. So definition doesn't have anything to do with discreteness. I just use discreteness as an example because we care about something like clustering, finite mixture, which is a kind of this is a kind of application where the mixing measure is discrete. But
the interpretation is something that is not misleading because G may not have any atoms.
So for Dirichlet process prior, under this prior, G has to be discrete with property 1. Right? So that it turns out that most of the prior distribution, if you want to come about, most of the distribution on the space of measure within unbound number of points or whatever, it has to have this property. Because the space is so large. But the support is dense, right? So the space of discrimination is dense, it's measure, so that's why it is so rich. Okay, so that are the atoms. If you want to learn about the atoms, right? So for every 2 atoms, you would have at least 1 atom from Gn that converts to it, right? Because we could be in this situation, we don't know how many support points Gn should not have, right? And moreover, it's possible that some of the atoms from Gn that's sort of wandering here and there, right, in the space. But the mass that is attached to those atoms have to vanish to 0, right? At a very large, a very, very fast rate over again up to the R. Over again up to R. R is greater than 1 at least, or 1 greater than 1. Therefore, these redundant atoms, vanish very fast. Right. So this is the fast part, and this would be very slow. Okay, so the first result in the literature about the conversions of the mixing measure is a paper that I wrote in 2013, and you can prove something of the following form, right? That suppose that the true density is a mixture density P with the true mixing measure G0. Okay, and for this result, G0 doesn't have to be a discrete measure. Can any property measure on a compact space, on a balanced space. Now, you use something like Dirichlet prior on G. Doesn't matter what is true G0. You compute this posterior distribution using MCMC or whatever method. What you can show is that the posterior contract towards G0 at a certain rate under W2 distance was assigned of the second order. And the rate depends on the smoothness of the kernel density F. So for Gaussian, it belongs to the space of smooth kernels. Gaussian is very smooth. But so smoothness beta is defined in terms of the Fourier coefficient. You take the Fourier transform of kernel density F, right? And you look at how fast does this Fourier transform tend towards 0 as and frequency go to infinity. That determines the smoothness of the kernel. So for Gaussian kernel, the Fourier coefficient tends to 0 exponentially fast, and that's why it's called super smooth kernel. So the rate is very slow. The posterior contraction rate is very slow, like 1 over log n to a certain order, n amount rate of points. So 1 over log n is super slow, right? You hardly learn anything. So that's kind of interesting because when people think about Gaussian, right? Think of mixture. First thing they give example is Gaussian. So Gaussian density turns out to be very good when you try to approximate the density function. It produces optimal rate. But what is so good at density approximation and estimation turns out to be very bad at parameter estimation. This is the first example of this kind of tension between black box approximability and if you want to use a model to interpret, right? They tend to don't know each other that well. Now, if the kernel F is less smooth, it's still very smooth, something like Laplace. Laplace is something like e to the minus the distance, right? Not then the Fourier coefficient is 10 to 0 at a polynomial rate. And so that's called super smooth, and the rate is polynomial. Again, it depends on this beta smoothness. Right? But going back to our problem, what is our problem?
This one doesn't depend on the like how close are the means of the Gaussian flow to each other, or what the values are. They have
Oh, that's yeah, that part is the reason why the rate will be so slow. If you use it as
so you optimize over all possible.
if you have some extra function like that, you can improve the rate. So this is like whatever virtual density, that's the truth. Whatever it is, it's very, very, very general result, and you always use virtually quite anyway. So that's kind of interesting that still the method managed to recover the truth, even though it could be very slowly depending on the smoothness of the film. Okay, but still, going back to our problem, let's say I'm interested in clustering, right? So here's the kind of result that say that, oh, it's good that if you use something like directly processed mixture, you can still recover the true mixing measure. Even though we saw earlier that the number of support points actually, is inconsistent estimate. There's no contradiction here, but from this result, a very simple idea that we have is the following, right? So remember the meaning of conversions as we have G contract to a G naught, right? Suppose that we have G naught that have finite number of support points, right? What I just explained earlier, that what it means that for each of the true atoms of G naught, there's some atoms from Gn that converse with it. It's sort of clustered with the truth. Even though the number of support points might be very large, more than the true number of support points. But then you have this sort of clustering effect into the number of support points. So we can come up with a very simple procedure, post-processing procedure. We call it merge and truncate and merge. So for all the atoms that converge with the same atom, right, you can just merge them together. And there are also some of the atoms from Gn that vanish, right, in terms of mass. We truncate them appropriately. If you do that on the sample of the virtually processed posterior, then you do get a consistent estimate of number of mutual components. So that's the idea. And it turns out that so here's the illustration how you do this. Right, so let's say this is a particular, you run an MCMC on DT mixture, and this is an example of the kind of discrete measure. Right? This is one particular random sample of the DT. And you have something like this, right? Then what you do is that, for all the atoms that are close to each other, you just merge them into one. Okay? And then, so you have this, and maybe you do some simple mean, at some average. And then, of course, let's use some atoms that have very small amount of mass, like this one. You just truncate them away, or maybe you merge to the one that's closest to it. And at the end of the day, you merge them and you get only 3 different support points. That's your estimate. Okay? The procedure is very simple. So this is actually the procedure. Okay? It just run through the data just once. It doesn't need to go back. And so don't worry about this detail, but I wanted to point out a particular trick. Right? The first part is how do you merge? Right? You go to the set of atoms and you want to merge the one that are nearby. Right? So this is not a clustering problem, by the way. If clustering, it defeats the purpose. So what you do is that you want to focus your attention on the atoms where there's a lot of mass. So what you do is you just sample uniform random from the atoms. And then look at the one that nearby, close, just merge them, keep merging sequentially.
So the radius of the local neighborhood that you use for merging is the street, right?
It does depend on air, right? So okay, this is a theoretical procedure.
Okay, all right. Because I was going to ask how you can actually make this.
Okay, so this is an input. That's the good point. So you take a posterior sample, and the only thing is that you need a rate omega. This is a theoretical rate that we put, and it's upper bound, right? So yeah, you need to use that threshold. And any constant C positive. Now this procedure, in theory, works for any constant C. Right? In practice, C is important. It's just like in regularization. So sequentially you merge them in a probabilistic way. You sample the atoms with the weight that come from this pi, and then you go sequentially, you merge them, right? If C is less than this omega n, you merge them, right? This mass you merge.
So we know the PI.
PI is a thing that you get from this directly process. So yeah, PI changes from time to time. But we know from the theorem I showed you earlier that eventually.
So the procedure is not like we see all the data and we have to do something with it. But now it's like we generate the data the way we want and try to guess the data.
We have a set of data and data points, right? And you draw a sample from the conditional distribution of G given that data. And G is one such sample. And then you apply this procedure on that sample.
So we can have new samples.
You can have new sample because you run MCMC. You keep producing more and more samples. So every time you have a sample, you apply this procedure, and then at the end of the day, you get an estimate on the number of support points. And you collect all these samples. You have a Poisson distribution on this, and if you concentrate towards some true number of support points, this is what happens. Okay, so apply this procedure, merge, triangulate, merge, and let's say the truth is 3. And you run directionally process prior, you always overfit, right? You always have more because, as I said, with one more data point, you tend to place more mass with the higher numbers and number of components. But using our procedure for different choice of C, it will sort of concentrate to the true number of support point, which is 3 here. Okay. So of course the procedure is theoretical. This is a kind of simulation that's sort of backed up, but there's some literature about in practice what try of C is good. So that's something that will have to be explored. So this is a theorem that's sort of saying that if you apply the procedure, that's G to be the procedure sample from any Bayesian procedure, like the virtual process prior, and it has this kind of upper bound, asymptotic bound. Right? There exists some omega n, so that the conditional distribution of this statement, conditional data, right, tends with 1. So it's conversion with probability, and the statement is about G within this radius. And that is kind of the statement that I proved in the previous slide. So given that, apply the procedure on that data, you can learn the number of support points consistently. Yes?
So the conversion state that you showed about is like for the Bayesian.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Good question. So this for Bayesian procedure, is it optimal? Well, no, we don't know. We don't even know what is the optimal rate for. Now, for this rate, yes, we have some result about which rate is optimal. So the one about log n square root for Gaussian, that's optimal. But the one I showed for Laplace is still unknown question. We still don't know. As for this rate, we don't know it's optimal. I don't think so unless you make some assumption. You can't say, right? But at least it's conversion probability. Okay, so this is the first part of the talk, and what I show you is that you do something like you don't know support points. You can do something post processing. I can talk about this, but some true Bayesian statisticians, they might not like this because they want everything to be contained in the Poisson distribution. Now you do this little post processing, then what are you doing, right? Because for Bayesian, Poisson distribution is very it's like the holy concept. You don't want to mess up with it. But I think there's nothing wrong with that. I make some argument about by applying this post-processing, you still have a meaningful quantity. You have a posterior on something that has a mathematical meaning. And if you care about number of clusters, then you'll find you have this nice property. Next, I'm going to talk about, so this is about number of clusters, but the harder question is, how about the parameters themselves? How well you can estimate them? What is the rate? Much harder question. So I'm going to talk about that, maybe more quickly. But this is the harder part. So what is it that we're trying to do here? In order to talk about the ability to recover the parameters, let's think about the data coming from Richter Gaussian, right? And you want to recover the means and the variance for each of these individual Gaussian components, right? And everything captured in terms of the Richter mixing measure. The first order of requirement is the notion of identifiability. That is to say that if I give you one Richter density, it needs to identify uniquely the mixing measure G, right? You need that property. Because if the mixture density doesn't uniquely identify the mixing measure, then there's no hope of learning that. So that's just a minimum condition. Now, but this is actually an easy condition, because think about the mixture density. How is it defined? It's just a linear combination. It's a convex combination. It's a linear combination of a collection of functions, Gaussian density, right? So now, if this class of functions are linearly independent, then if I somehow know the true density, it should uniquely identify, right, each Gaussian component uniquely. Because, and that's the fact about mixture, about collection of Gaussian, and this is almost true for any kernels that we use in practice. Now, if you want to learn about how fast I can estimate each of these Gaussian components, then you need to know more. You need to know more. What you need is the order of identifiability. Okay, so classical zero identifiability is what I said. The collection of kernel density functions are linearly independent. That's the condition. Want to learn about parameter estimation rate? You want to talk about something like one identifiability. But if you talk about the class of kernel function f, talk about the first order derivative of f with respect to the parameter theta you care about. Insist that this collection of functions are independent, linearly independent. You can also talk about true identifiability, that is linear independence of all these kernel functions, its first and its second order derivatives. And you insist that they are linearly independent, and so on. So it turns out that most of the single parameter families of kernel density, like Gaussian or the things that belong to the family, the exponential family of distributions, so almost any density function that you know they belong to this class. If those density functions have only single parameter, like Gaussian, fixed scale, fixed variant, only vary the location. Okay. Gamma, fixed the shape, vary the rate, or vice versa. So it turns out that they all satisfy this identifiability up to very high order. And if you hit those conditions, you can talk about the parameter estimation rate. On the other hand, you might ask, if the kernel density has more than one parameter, how common is this identifiability, or how common is this weak identifiability? Meaning that how common is it that some of the assumption about identifiability is violated? It turns out to be very common. So, for instance, look at the Gaussian kernel, right? Let's look at the Gaussian kernel and suppose that I vary both the means and the variance. And Gaussian kernel satisfies this sort of partial differential equation. Let's say that if you take the second order derivative with respect to the mean, it's 2 times the first derivative with respect to the variance. Right. So what it means is that you don't have true identifiability because the linear independence between the second derivative and the first derivative is violated, right? Because you have this identity. And this equation is like something that you look like the heat equation, right? In fact, the heat equation is the equation that people use to interpret the notion, the use of Gaussian in normally the transfer of the propagation of heat. It's kind of interesting that this kind of phenomena kind of play a role in our understanding of this inference behavior. Gaussian has a problem. Now let's talk about gamma. It has this sort of partial differential equation as well. So for gamma, you don't even have one identifiability because you see that the first derivative with respect to the shape of the scale, it can be expressed as the linear combination of the kernel density f for different choice of parameter a and b. So how about skew normal kernel density? It has these nonlinear partial differential equations. So it doesn't satisfy first or second or whatever order of identifiability. It does have this strong identifiability at 0 order. And that's why the conversion behavior of the parameters can be so complex for this class model. And I don't think I have, so this is the work that Nguyen and I are working on, and we have never seen any equation like this. And it's just, the first one is rather well known. look like heat equation, but all this one, not something we'll talk about. Okay, so how does this identifiability going to affect the rate conversion? So here is the first result that if you have true identifiability, okay, and what you do, that holds for location Gaussian mixture, that holds for scale Gaussian mixture, compact parameter space. So here's the set of the theorem. Suppose that data are n IID sample from some K0 mixture. So the number of true mixing components is K0. And of course, I don't know what is the true K0. What I do is that I do know, let's assume that I know the upper bound of K0. So I know that, let's say K0 is less than 100. So I set K to be 100. So what people tend to do is that they're going to fit the data with a mixture of 100 components, right? So this is sort of the overfitted setting. Now, if you do that, whether you use maximum likelihood estimation or you use the Bayesian method here with your standard Bayesian method, you have the same kind of construction rate. That is, 1 over log n over n up to 1/4 because you overfit. You don't have the square root n, right? That's the standard rate when everything's nice and good. But because you overfit here under strong identifiability, you have this 1 over n. Okay? What it means is that you can still learn the redundant, the components parameters at the rate 1/4 and to 1/4. And so that holds for location Gaussian mixture, scale Gaussian mixture, anything that satisfies true identifiability condition. But go back to the example of mixture of location scale Gaussians, where I said that it doesn't satisfy true identifiability because of this heat equation. There's an interaction between the mean and the variance through the heat equation. That is, you take a second derivative of f with respect to the mean, that gives you the same 2 times the first derivative of f with respect to variance. So because of this kind of interaction, the rate gets very interesting. The rate is the following. You're going to be affected by how much you overfit the model, the truth. So if you overfit the model by 1 component, right? Let's say the truth is you have 1 component, or 2, you fit by 3. Then the rate of conversion will be n to the 1/8. Overfit by 2, the rate is 1/12. Okay? And more generally, the more you overfit, the worse the rate of the estimation. And so that is sort of telling you something that you don't want to overfit the model too liberally. If you want to learn about the meaning of the components, because you want to put a meaning, this is subordination, and the truth is that somewhere a low number of topics, let's say, everybody doing topic models say, let's use 30 topics. Don't do that. Don't try to be, a bit judicious about it. If you want to interpret, by the way. If you don't want to interpret, that's fine. You can still overfit. It's still a parametric model. Now, in general, what's interesting here is that the precise rate of conversion is related to the notion of dimensionality in simplified variety. So this is a sort of set that is defined by the solution of a system of polynomial equations. And I'll give you an example of that system of polynomial equation. But once you get that, you can figure out what's the rate. So what does this system of polynomial equation look like? It looks like this. And this system of equation is derived from the Gaussian kernel partial differential equation I told you. It doesn't really depend on the form of the kernel of the Gaussian kernel per se, but it's really it is determined by the equation that I told you. And so this is a number of this k minus k0 is a matter of overfitting, right? So you have 3 times of this plus 1 equations variables c, a, and b. You can write down this equation that look like this. And then what you do is that you're trying to keep putting more and more equation into the system of this form. And you keep doing that until the system becomes over-constrained, right? There are no longer any valid solutions, non-trivial valid solution. At that point you stop and that you declare this is a rate convergence. Okay? And I will explain why that's the case maybe in the next slide. But let's look at the equation. How does it look like? Suppose that you overfit the model by 1 component, right? And of course you want to figure out what is the rate conversion, right? What is R? Let's R to be 3, write out all this equation. This is a system of equation, there are 3 of them. So it turns out that there is some non-trivial solution for this. It has to be non-zero, etc. But if you let R to be 4, then you add one more equation into this system, then you have this extra equation here, and this coefficient of 4 equation doesn't admit any solution. That's why you stop, and you take 4 times 2, that gives you 8, that's why you get the rate of 1/8 when you overfit by 1. So that's sort of the result we have. And the so this is some of the solution we show that this is the kind of rate that we get by overfitting. And as you see that if you get something like 1/12, it's very slow. You have to be careful. So here's the intuition why you have this kind of equations. Remember that you have the heat equation for Gaussian, right? So in the proof, what we do is that we look at the density function per se. Right? The density function defines the likelihood, which is a function on the parameters. We care about the parameters. Obviously, what we care about is if you vary the parameter, you vary the mixing measure, how does it going to affect the likelihood function, right? So the question is, if you vary the mixing measure in the Wasserstein likelihood, how does it going to affect the likelihood function in, of course, if G converts to G naught, then the likelihood converts to G naught, that's easy direction. But if suppose I want to insist that the mixture density converts to the true mixture density, how does it going to push G plus G naught, right? So I want to understand that. And you do something like Taylor expansion, that's clearly is one of the tools. And then you want to utilize this equation, the heat equation, to make sure that all the compounds are linearly independent, right? And then you action out. All of this thing has some meaning about the parameters. So C, A, and B here correspond to perturbation of the parameters for the mean, for the variance, and CJ corresponding to perturbation of the mixture compound. So that's where you have this kind of interaction between the parameters that determine the rates. And of course, this is just a sort of the glimpse of this kind of result. And what is interesting here, as I work on this for some time, is it's just amazing how complex this class of simple models that when we use something like mixture models, the reason we use them is that we said that the mixture model, this class of model is so rich that it can capture the heterogeneity of the data. Because the data can belong to different components, right? So that's why you mixture. But what happened in here is that the inference, which is the learning of the parameter, is also have this inhomogeneity. It's inverse process. Given the data, you learn the parameter. If you learn a parameter, this parameter have this kind of inhomogeneity. That inhomogeneity. The reason it is there because of two things. One is that this kind of partial differential equation that govern the density kernel, as we have seen earlier, and moreover, now you're mixing between different kernels, so that creates another layer of complexity, right? And at a high level, because of that, if you write out this is sort of Fisher function matrix, which is capture the second order of the likelihood, then this matrix degenerates in certain alpha varieties that form a subset of the parameter space, so that some part of the parameter space is more singular than others. Right? So they all make the Fisher function, right, to be zero, but some direction are more singular than others. And so what this implied is, so this is written in a very long paper that I wrote recently, that and this one is close to 100 pages, that's so technical. But what you can show is that that for mixture models of this sort, then different parameters of different types might possess different rate of convergence. Okay? So for instance, for mixture Gaussian, we can show that. Even though Wasserstein doesn't show it here, but we can generalize notion of Wasserstein system, and we can show that. In fact, for mixture Gaussian, the scale parameters contract faster than the equation. The variance converges faster than the mean. Okay? And moreover, even parameter of the same type might carry distinct rate of convergence. So it depends on the truth. Okay? So for instance, if the data coming from a mixture of skew normal, right? So, and for skew normal, it's a generalization of Gaussian kernel, There's a mean, there's a variance, there's a shape, right? It depends on, are you going to skew to the left or skew to the right, things like that. And if the truth, there is some kernel that is actually a Gaussian, so you don't skew anywhere. Actually, it's very hard to learn that. The rate correlation to that, if that's the truth, is very slow. So different parameters in the model actually possess different rate conversions. Depends on the truth. Some are much harder to learn than others. So, so then let me just sort of skip that and let's talk quickly about the last part of the talk, because I think this is the thing sort of doesn't require a lot of technicality, but it's very interesting. It's about misclassification. All mixture models are misspecified. Okay, so that we all agree, all models are misspecified. But let's say that we stick to mixture models, and let's assume this, that in fact the data x1 up to xn, they are indeed generated from true mixture density. Remember, mixture density, there's two parts, right? One is the mixture components f, and one is the mixing measure g. So if I say mixture Gaussian, then I have to say that, oh, the components come from Gauss, and then where among those Gauss, which variance, that captured by the mixing measure g naught. Right? So assuming that this is the truth, still there's a lot of things that can go wrong, right? Because what you do is that as a machine learning modeler or statistician modeler, what you do is you fit the data using this mixture model, right? With the mixture density, with the components f and the mixing measure g. And yes, indeed the truth is mixture density. But there are three possible ways things can still go wrong. That is, f is wrong. Okay, the truth comes from Gauss, but you Laplace instead, right? Or the mixing measure is misspecified, meaning that you put the wrong sort of misspecified the space of support, something like that. Or you can misspecify both of them. Right? Okay, so that is a common situation, and still you have the data that come your way. You condition data and compute the posterior, or you do machine learning estimation or whatever, some point estimation. You obtain the estimate tree. So the question is, what happened to this posterior when you actually misspecify the model? Okay. Now, in general, what you can do, you can say is the following. Under some identifier condition, and I talked about earlier, you can show that G tends to some G star. G star would be the sort of some kind of best possible mixing measure within the space of misspecified. Okay. But how do you interpret this? How do you interpret this? Because suppose that if f is not f naught, so if you misspecify the kernel density, okay, what does it mean?
It's likely the same as a frequency solution.
Yeah, in theory, Bayesian frequency actually tend to the same solution.
The frequencies that you use for these are.
Oh no, this is the theory applied for both frequencies and phase. Okay. So I tell you what have been proved and what is now proved, but still there's a lot of other questions. But I want to talk about the meaning of what we do. Okay, that is, think about it this way: you have data, right? And then I give it to you that the data are coming from mixture density, so that we can agree on. Right? That's the truth. Now, but what you do, you never know the truth, right? So you never know whether they are coming from mixture Gaussian, but yes, you fit by mixture Gaussian, and you get all these components. Right? So what does it mean, right? So we know what is bad, right? Suppose that the choice of kernel f is widely different from the true f naught. Then G star is probably widely different from G, right? Yeah, you can get that, right? And so it probably doesn't mean much if that's the case. Now, mathematically, it's interesting to define the relationship between G star, what you converge to, right, and the true G naught, mathematically.
But it's like G star involved with F, this is G naught involved with F naught.
Oh yes, that you can do, yeah. But if you want to interpret, right, so, because you remember I said that sometimes you want to interpret your latent variable G, right? Then what does it mean if the confidence that you usually find is wrong in the first place? Who would say that they're right? So, okay, this is the big word, epistemology. So as a statistician, that's the wonderful word for me to use this word. It means a theory of knowledge. And the truth is that we never know the truth about G naught and F naught, right? We have no idea. Even though there's a true, density generated data. You go to school, you learn about Gaussian and Bernoulli and Laplace and Poisson. You fit with that, but you never know if that's the truth. So you never know the truth, right? But still, you do. You do massive estimation. You do Bayesian inference. You run MC, and you get this G. We'll say on G, and it contracts to G star. That's what I show. But what does it mean, right? So you always, and it turns out that what I'm showing this slide, I have a result that show that different choice of kernel F admit different beta conversions. Either you converse to the wrong thing, but you can say something about how fast you converse to the wrong thing. And that raises the question then, how does it affect the ability to choose the kernels when everything would go wrong? Okay, so I need some condition, right, in order to prove anything. And the condition regarding the truth, that is how we specify F and G as they are related to the true F naught and G naught. I need some very simple assumption. And that is how wrong, But I just need something like this, very simple. It's just, let's say that there's some G naught, that's the true rate, the support of it. And instead, I fit the data with kernel F, right? And all I need is that I take the ratio between F and true F naught, restricted within this circle of radius R. And I just want to make sure that this ratio doesn't go out of bounds too quickly. Okay, so as I increase to infinity, I do allow this to go exponentially fast. So that's all the assumption that I need, even though I don't know the truth. Okay? I don't really know F naught, but if somehow I can use this kind of F, and this is condition. And as far as the price is concerned, I can use Dirichlet process and any other kind of price that's reasonable. Okay, so with the assumption, then you can show the following. So again, going back to the existing, what had been known in the literature, everything is known about the mixture density. Nothing is known about G. So what is new here in our work is that so classical result is whether you do maximum level estimation, that's by White. You do Bayesian, that is by van der Waal. They can show that the mixture density contract to the best element in the class of misspecified densities. And by best, I mean the one that minimizes the KL divergence from the true to the one in the class. Right? So that is the one theory for the density. Now we care about not just density, right? We care about G. So what happened? So we have to resolve for true particular choice of kernel, Gaussian or Laplace. So Gaussian look like this, right? Laplace look like that. So let me quickly, because I run out of time, just to give you this result. For Gaussian, I have the same weight. So G tend to the G star under the same kind of log n weight. Right? And for Laplace, I get something a bit faster. It sort of look like polynomial. Okay? So that's sort of basic sort of result. But I want to bring to this kind of implication, this kind of discussion, as far as I find interesting. Now, we see that Gaussian contraction bound for location which with Gaussian kernel remains the log n weight, right? Square root, regardless of whether you misspecify F naught or not. Because remember, the first part of the talk, I also give the same kind of bound for Gaussian, assuming that the truth comes from mixture Gaussian. You misspecify by Gaussian kernel. Okay, it's very slow, yes, but the rate is the same, very slow. Now that brings a question. You don't know anything about the true density, so should you use Gaussian kernel or not? If you want to interpret. Okay, so there are two ways to answer this. One way to say is no, because log n is too slow, and so the data doesn't really affect the movement from mass from 5 to 7. You don't learn much, so shouldn't use it. So that's one way to answer that. But you can also say yes. Actually, you should do that because you misspecify more anyway, and what's the point? You want to be conservative. You convert to something that is misspecified. convert something so fast to the wrong thing could be equally dangerous. So the truth is that my data is limited, right? So Gaussian does make move the needle a little bit, but then it's more slow. So I don't know the answer to this question, but I want to bring us another scenario, right? So we know that for Laplace, the bound is a bit faster polynomial rate. But suppose that, consider this scenario, that the true density is actually mixture Gaussian. God tells you that. But the sample size n is small. So should we intentionally specify the model to be Laplace instead? Okay? Because as I said, the amount of data n is so small, log n doesn't do anything to you if you want to do that, to say, oh, look at what I learned, right? I think the ultimate answer lies in this tension between bias and variance. In the following sense, the bias is how far G star is toward the G naught. So how far is the conversion point here related to the truth? And I said mathematics is a very hard question. But how is that related to the contracting variant? As you increase n to infinity. And of course, this is really a question that we have no idea. And when I did a talk at Oxford, and it raised a lot of discussion afterward about this. Okay, so here's a summary for the talk. Give you some snippet about the quality of parameter estimation, and once you can estimate the model, how you want to interpret them. And you see that no size fits all. What is good for the estimation tends to not so good if you want to care about parameter estimation. Something about learning neural cluster, something about some form, you always specify that some form of misspecification might be more interpretable than others. Right? The question is, which choice should we go with? And that remains an open question. And I want to end the talk with another note, that is, okay, this talk is all about theory, that is, some topics about the behavior, the likelihood function, about posterior distribution for parameter estimation. And for many people doing research or doing work with data science and looking at data, they may say, I only care about is prediction. I work with black box model. Right? I don't care about the quality of parameter estimation. And I could give you that, but on the other hand, when you work with your model, you still need to estimate the parameters, right? You don't need to interpret them in the way that in this theoretical sense, but to understand the behavior of the likelihood function at the parameter variance is also important from and this kind of geometric understanding of some sort of algebraic geometry, it gives you a sense of how well you can estimate from a computational standpoint, right? Because as I said, I sort of alluded to that, the reason you can have some slow behavior here is because the likelihood function, look at the second order, the Fisher function, the curvature of this likelihood function, right? There's certain direction where it's very flat. That affects the rate of conversion. But if you want to do optimization, right, you want to avoid those directions as well. If you want even to have a fast computational procedure to learn. So this understanding about this sort of the surface of the likelihood will be helpful in that regard, from both sort of theoretical standpoint here, but also from a computational standpoint. So. Thank you for your attention. So
that's time for maybe 2 quick questions.
Is there a way you know that you are wrong? So you never know that you are right? But you get something, and so you come up with some result. It's a way to get something.
Yes, there's the way to know that you're wrong. And one way to say that is you do hypothesis testing, right? And then you can characterize type 1 error, right? Property that you raise the false alarm.
So let's say you assume that the kernel is Laplace and you come up with something. And
yes.
How do you test?
You reject, right? You can reject it. You can come up with a procedure, and then you say, if the truth is Gaussian, then you can use some probability theory result, right? Usually that's what you do. And then you say, by Laplace number, right? and I use some kind of rule that maybe using something called matrices. I use that to resolve it, and I say then it has this property. Now I look at data, actually it doesn't have this property. Then I have to reject this hypothesis that it cannot be Gaussian. So you can reject things, but you don't know what is the alternative. That's the thing. You can reject, and that can be made rigorous. But what is the alternative? What people do is that they propose another alternative, and that could be wrong. But the fact that you reject something doesn't mean you can accept the others. So that is a fundamental difficulty of inference problem. You have to realize on some assumption about the class of alternatives. But if that is wrong, then of course this is what we said. Right? If that's wrong, what happens? But how do we know if we're wrong? We don't. Well, we always know we're wrong. We just don't know if we're right. We can't know that if we are wrong.
In the regression, you care about bias variance because it has implications for the test.
Okay, can you raise your voice?
So in the regression problems, so you care about bias variance trade-off because it needs something more testing.
Yes.
Here, and you mentioned the bias variance, but in what sense? What are the trade-offs?
Yes. What exactly is the bias variance trade-off, right? So the bias here is how far the truth is from the class of model that we use. So that is the bias.
No, I understand.
Right.
That's a criteria. Let's say the regression, I want to get this or this one, and then I can come up with something. Explicit trade-off of bias variance. The main criteria is the testing. That generalization. From that, I can get what kind of model I should use and how much value I should use. But here, what is the criteria here?
I don't know what would be the criteria because even though there's a bias we define well, right? And the variance is something that is the sort of variation towards G star. Now, the two quantities, they don't sit on the same syntax scale. One is fixed, valid away from zero, no matter how large n is. And one, and does go to infinity, that also zero to zero. So, I don't think I addressed your question. I don't quite understand the gist of the question, but as far as the sort of the general issue of how to actually apply bias and variance trade-off, I think this is an open issue because we don't get the right scale to the quantity. Usually when people say bias and variance, the two quantities that sit together and we add them up, or bias plus variance squared, right? Minimize that. That's the meaning of a parametric model because that corresponds to something like MSE. And everybody agree on MSE that that's bias plus variance squared, but also not bias plus variance is always squared. But in this case, I don't know really what would be the right. Intuitively, it's just something about this true quantity that needs to come into play that if the bias is so large, why would I use Laplace? I don't. Because sure, I can have something that converges faster towards G star, but G star is so wrong, so different from G naught. I don't want to use Laplace. But if the bias is kind of not so large, then I might be willing to do it. The harder question is to understand the distance or the relation between G naught and G star. That's incredibly hard. Even in a simple example, 1D data. Let's say data coming from which of two Gaussian, you use which of two Laplace, or three. What does it converge to? Actually, it's very hard. We have no idea. We thought it easy to, but we haven't been able to progress.
We have a very zero question, probably not relatable to what we can solve. So we said that when we misspecify, let's say the model is wrong, then we should be slow in terms of converging to the wrong solution, right? And I'm just trying to see what kind of slow, we should let's say in gradient descent, we should convert to that slowly, or what does that mean by slow?
Slow here is with respect to the sample size, and right. But at the end of the talk, I also mentioned that the gist of this gradient, the reason you have this gradient is actually the flatness or of the likely surface, and that has an effect on the output equation. If you want to do something gradient descent, right? You descend on the wrong and the unfortunate subset, then you don't make much progress, and it's very slow too. Then the rate will be corresponding to the number of gradient updates. And I believe it's the same thing. It governs the same. Both are governed by the same thing.
So in deep learning, I'm sure that all the model we specify for any calculator is not the right one, right? But we always try to, make the conversion faster by different kind of computation technique.
Yes.
Reduce the computational cost. Then.
So what I'm saying is that the conversion in terms of the density function is still fast for this. What is slow is the individual parameters. That could be very slow. So when you write an algorithm, you don't get access to the density function directly. You get access to the density function through the parameters that you use to represent, right? Yeah. And so, and every time you do, we update the parameters, right? I believe that it has the same, kind of behavior. That if you're not careful for some of this model, right, if you have this kind of wicked environment, then the individual parameter and you do gradient update is also very slow. I mean, intuitively, if you overfit, you have more parameters to contend with. Right? That obviously give you a sense that it has to slow down the conversion. That's the most quite obvious. But even if you know exactly how many parameters there are in the model, so I have the example for a gamma mixture. You don't get polynomial rate. You can show that. You have minimum, minimax bound that show that there are always the truths of that. You can never get polynomial rate. And even though we know exactly how many parameters there are, because the parameters they interact with each other through all these partial differentiation. What it means that you write out the second order and the derivative of the feature, and they degenerate. That is a certain direction that is so flat that it doesn't do anything.
Also, the thing that you talked about that, they're super interesting. So it seems like they will have those situations where priors use characteristic processes where some will like discrete form you want. So I'm just curious, like, what is the literature currently like when you have mathematics prior to 1,000 processes or things like that?
So the literature percent prior is the nicest prior. All the nice computational property. So if you use something different, then I think the rate will be worse.
I think I'm just curious, what if I use a prior that will lead to discrete measure? So I'm not really interested in what I'm just thinking, again, this is still a mixture model, it's kind of a continuous mixture model where the mixing measure is not.
Well, so when suppose the mixing measure is not discrete, how do you define that?
So Gaussian process.
So Gaussian process is now the Gaussian process. Okay, so Gaussian process is a distribution of space function, right? And characterized into the smoothness. Characterized into Fourier function. That basically Gaussian process. Now, this scalar function essentially, the support of Gaussian process essentially is Sobolev space. Okay? And so if that's the truth, yeah, you should use it. But the rate of the estimation or conversion of this, if you know the truth like that, you don't need to do it prior. You use something like Sobolev type or Gaussian process type. And the rate going to be dependent on the smoothness of this covariance function. Yes. So that'll be faster than covariance. I agree. The problem is that actually that's a small space. Space of the smooth function is actually much smaller space than the space of all the. Remember that the division prior is so rich that you take any true density, any true measure. It is, it will cover any, support everything. So more precisely, any measure, any probability measure, put any Wasserstein ball around it, there are enough mass under the Dirichlet rate on it. You can bound it, lower bound it. I need to use that property. So
And so usually behave like a uniform part on the space of management. That's why it's so powerful. Uniform meaning that it doesn't need to be flat like this because it's infinite dimensional space, right? But within a Wilson cycle, there's enough mass, it's still in range. Now, if you use something Gaussian process, if that turns out to be correct, then you should use it. But if you don't know that, then you shouldn't use it because it would be wide. It's specified more.
I have one question. Do you think if we have some kind of external knowledge about CMM, for example, so can the conversion rate can be better?
If you know something about, so for instance, if you know the distance between virtual components are bounded by something, yes, and then you can get something fast, all the way up to square thing. Now, here's where the problem becomes sort of artificial because, if you do something like that, and if you also assume that the parameter space live in a compact set, and then you also insist that the pairwise distance between different parameters is better from some epsilon. It is the same as saying that we know a band upper band on the number of components. Then I have some rate that is square root n to 1/4. And I didn't talk about it here, but we have a way to get up to n to square root n, which is the optimal rate. So in that solution, that's fine. All is good.
Yeah, that's very surprised. But the CMS was so slow.
That's what we find in practice here.
Yeah.
And again, the intuition is the following, right? So you have the mean and the variance, and the likelihood function is what that contains information about the data contains about the parameter, and because of the heat equation, right? So you can sort of trick yourself by varying the means, right? Because what you do is that you want to vary the mean a little bit and see how it affects the likelihood function through the data. That's the guidance. I'll give you the guidance for estimating the mean. But the model can trick you by varying the variance instead. Because the mean and the variance, they have this coupling through the heat equation. If you don't have this coupling, then that's fine. And that is the reason why. So if you play with Gaussian, you see Gaussian is so smooth, right? So what it means is that you have any little part of the surface, you can always squeeze in one more Gaussian to fit the density better. That's why it's so good when you estimate the density. People use Gaussian density all the time. But because it's so flexible, you can always squeeze something nice and smooth into any crack of the density surface. The problem comes when you want to interpret, right? Because it's hard to interpret them other than just being black box.
So in the case of linearly not independent, or sometimes the components are independent, the conversion rate might be more slow.
Yes. Yes. So here we have a linearly independent of the class, but you don't have linearly independence when you partially differentiate.
That's more easier.
Yeah, because if you care about primary estimation, you need to differentiate, right? With respect to the primary, because that's what you want to get to. And but you see here that even though you have linear independence, meaning that you can identify it, right? But the rate could be arbitrarily slow. And that's what we found with skew normal. The rate could be as slow as go all the way to infinity. So we develop a notion we call singularity level, just to capture how singular this Fisher function is. Even though they all give you degenerate, zero, determinant, right? But there are different, level of singularity. That depends on this dimensionality of these alpha varieties. That's what it boils down to. That's which caused me to learn a bit about Bayesian metrics.
Okay, so I think please join me in thanking the speaker.
Thank you.